While my cousins were celebrating their millions at my grandfather's funeral, I stood there holding a crumpled envelope with a single plane ticket inside. Everyone laughed at me that day. 6 months later, they were begging for my forgiveness. My name is Nathan Whitmore, and I'm about to tell you how the worst day of my life became the beginning of everything I never knew I needed. But first, let me introduce you to the players in this game my grandfather orchestrated from beyond the grave. There was Preston, my older cousin, standing there in his $5,000 Armani suit, already practicing his CEO speech for the company employees. Mallory, his sister, was barely hiding her excitement behind her designer sunglasses, probably planning which Instagram filter would best capture her new yacht. Their parents, Vernon and Beatrice, stood like vultures who'd finally found their feast, my uncle's hand already reaching for the papers the lawyer was holding. And then there was me, the high school history teacher who drove 3 hours in a Honda Civic that needed new brakes just to say goodbye to the only person in this family who ever really saw me. Grandfather Roland built an empire from nothing, turned a single fishing boat into Whitmore Shipping Industries, and everyone wanted their piece of his kingdom. Everyone except me. I just wanted 5 more minutes to play chess with the old man who taught me that the most powerful moves are the ones nobody sees coming. That funeral wasn't just about saying goodbye to Roland Whitmore. It was the day I learned that sometimes the smallest gift carries the biggest secret, and sometimes the people laughing at you are standing on ground that's about to crumble beneath their feet. My alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. every weekday, just like it had for the past 6 years since I started teaching at Lincoln High School in Detroit. The ceiling in my one-bedroom apartment had the same water stain I'd been staring at for 3 years, shaped like the state of Texas if you squinted hard enough. My neighbor's dog was already barking, right on schedule, and I could hear Mrs. Chen starting her morning exercises through the paper-thin walls. This was my life, predictable, modest, and completely different from the world I'd grown up in. You see, being a Whitmore meant something in certain circles. It meant yacht clubs and private schools, summer houses and stock portfolios. But for me, it meant choosing between paying rent and fixing my car's transmission, because I'd walked away from all of that to teach teenagers about the Revolutionary War and the Great Depression. My father, Dennis, understood that choice. He was the only one who ever did. Dad died when I was 15, a heart attack at his desk while reviewing contracts for his brother Vernon's division of grandfather's company. He'd spent his whole life being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who never complained when Vernon took credit for his ideas. The last thing he ever said to me was, "Nathan, don't let them turn you into something you're not. Your grandfather did that to me and look where I am." 3 hours later, he was gone. My mother, Grace, picked up the pieces after that. She was a nurse at Detroit General, working 12-hour shifts to keep us afloat after we learned Dad had signed away most of his company shares to help Vernon cover some bad investments. That was Dad, always cleaning up other people's messes, always believing family meant sacrifice. Mom never said a bitter word about it, but I saw how she looked at Vernon at Dad's funeral, and I understood that sometimes the deepest anger doesn't need words. Grandfather Roland was a mystery wrapped in a 3-piece suit. He built Whitmore Shipping from a single boat he bought with his Navy discharge pay after World War II. By the time I was born, he owned a fleet of cargo ships, warehouses in 12 cities, and enough money to buy whatever he wanted. But here's the thing about my grandfather. He didn't believe in giving. He believed in earning. Every birthday card came with a $20 bill and a note that said, "Make it worth more." Every Christmas gift was something practical, like books about business or certificates for online courses in accounting. The only time Grandfather Roland seemed genuinely interested in me was during our Sunday chess games. It started when I was 10, right after I'd won my school's chess tournament. He showed up at our apartment one Sunday morning, set up a board, and said, "Show me what you've got." I lost in 12 moves, but he came back the next Sunday and the next, and eventually those games became the one constant between us. "You play like your father," he told me once, Too worried about protecting your pieces, not focused enough on winning the game. Maybe I don't want to sacrifice everything just to win, I replied. He actually smiled at that, the first real smile I'd ever seen from him. Maybe that's why you're the only one who still interests me, Nathan. Preston and Mallory never understood those chess games. Preston was too busy shadowing grandfather at the office, learning about profit margins and tax shelters. He'd gotten his MBA from Wharton, grandfather's alma mater, and never let anyone forget it. Every family dinner turned into Preston's personal TED Talk about market optimization and strategic acquisitions. He spoke in buzzwords and PowerPoint slides, turning every conversation into a business pitch. Mallory took a different approach. She turned herself into a brand, chronicling her life as the shipping heiress on social media. 200,000 followers watched her pose on various boats, in various designer outfits, at various European ports. She called it building her platform, but really, she was just spending grandfather's money while waiting for more. Her biggest achievement was getting a blue checkmark on Instagram and dating a Swiss banker who owned a vineyard. Vernon and Beatrice, Preston and Mallory's parents, were the ultimate power couple in the most hollow way possible. Vernon had worked his way up to CFO of Whitmore Shipping, though most of the real work was done by his assistant. Beatrice spent her time at charity galas, not because she cared about the causes, but because she liked seeing her picture in the society pages. They lived in a house so big they needed an intercom system to talk to each other. And then there was me, teaching 43 teenagers about the Constitution, grading papers at a kitchen table I bought at a garage sale, and feeling more fulfilled than any of them could imagine. That was my life before the funeral, before the envelope, before everything changed. I thought I knew who I was and where I came from. Turns out I was watching the wrong pieces on the board all along. The Rochester Country Club had never felt more suffocating than it did that October afternoon. Grandfather Roland had specifically requested his will be read here, in the same oak-paneled room where he'd negotiated his biggest deals over brandy and cigars. The mahogany table reflected our faces like a dark mirror, and I could see Preston adjusting his Rolex for the third time in 5 minutes. We'd just come from the cemetery, where the autumn rain had turned the burial into a muddy mess that Beatrice complained about the entire ride over. Before we begin, Mr. Harwick, the family attorney, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and cleared his throat. I want you all to know that Roland was very specific about these arrangements. He reviewed this will 1 week before his passing. Vernon leaned forward, his hands already forming fists of anticipation. We understand, Harwick. Roland discussed the succession plan with me extensively. That was a lie, and everyone knew it. Grandfather never discussed business outside the office, and he certainly never promised anything to anyone. But Vernon had been telling anyone who'd listen that he was taking over as CEO, that Preston would be his right hand, and that the family legacy was secure. Let's proceed then. Harwick opened the leather-bound folder. To my eldest son, Vernon Whitmore, and his wife Beatrice, I leave the estate in the Hamptons and the investment portfolio contained an account ending in 4471. Beatrice grabbed Vernon's arm, her diamond bracelet catching the light. The Hamptons house. Oh, Vernon. He did remember how much we loved it there. To my grandson, Preston Whitmore, Harwick continued, I leave Whitmore Shipping Industries and all its operational assets, with the condition that he maintains current employment levels for at least 1 year. Preston stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. I knew it, Grandfather. I won't let you down. He was already pulling out his phone, probably to update his LinkedIn profile to CEO. To my granddaughter Mallory Whitmore, I leave the Manhattan penthouse on Central Park West and the yacht, Serenity, currently moored in Newport. Mallory let out a squeal that could have shattered crystal. The penthouse? Oh my God, do you know what that's worth? And the yacht, my followers are going to die. Mr. Harwick turned to me, and I saw something in his eyes that looked almost like pity. And to my grandson, Nathan Whitmore, I leave this. He pulled out a small white envelope, worn at the corners, my name written across it in grandfather's shaky handwriting. The room went silent for exactly 2 seconds before Preston started laughing. "Are you serious?" Preston's voice cracked with amusement. "That's it? An envelope?" I took it with steady hands, though my heart was pounding. The paper felt thin, insignificant. Inside was a single plane ticket. Rome. One way, departing in 48 hours. "Let me guess." Preston snatched the ticket from my hand before I could stop him. "A coach ticket? Oh, this is rich. The teacher gets a vacation." Mallory was already recording on her phone. "This is actually hilarious. Nathan, your face right now. Don't worry. Maybe he left you some frequent flyer miles, too." Vernon stood up, straightening his tie with the authority of someone who'd just won everything. "Roland always said you lacked the killer instinct for business, Nathan. At least he gave you something nice. Rome is lovely this time of year." "It's probably his way of saying goodbye," Beatrice added, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "A little trip to help you process everything. How thoughtful." My mother, who'd been silent in the corner, finally spoke. "Is that everything, Mr. Harwick?" "That concludes the distribution of assets," Harwick replied, closing the folder. "There is a personal letter for Nathan to be opened only upon his arrival in Rome." "A letter?" Preston was practically howling now. "What's it going to say? Sorry you're poor. Enjoy the pizza." "Preston, enough," Vernon said, though he was smiling. Nathan chose his path. He wanted to be a teacher, and Roland respected that enough to give him a parting gift. We should all be grateful for what we've received. I looked at the ticket again. October 15th. 3 p.m. arrival. Alitalia flight, 6:21. Why so specific? Why Rome? Grandfather had never mentioned Italy in all our years of chess games. He'd talked about Shanghai, London, Hamburg, but never Rome. "Well," I stood up, sliding the ticket back into the envelope. "I guess I better pack." "You're actually going?" Mallory looked genuinely surprised. "You're going to use your sick days to take a random trip to Rome?" "Your grandfather gave me a ticket," I said, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "The least I can do is use it." Vernon shook his head. "Sentimental fool, just like your father." Dennis never understood that emotion has no place in business either. That's when I knew I was definitely getting on that plane. Because Vernon was wrong about my father, wrong about me, and maybe, just maybe, wrong about what grandfather had really left me. The ticket weighed nothing in my pocket, but somehow it felt heavier than all the millions they'd just inherited. As I walked out of that country club, their laughter following me to the parking lot, I remembered grandfather's last words to me during our final chess game. "The best moves, Nathan, are the ones your opponent never sees coming." The rain had stopped, and for the first time that day the sun broke through the clouds. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the plane ticket while my laptop displayed my bank account balance. $1,847.23. My rent was due in 5 days. My car needed new brake pads. I had 43 essays on the Civil War to grade. Every logical part of my brain screamed that flying to Rome was insane. But I couldn't stop thinking about grandfather's face during our last chess game, just 2 weeks before he died. He'd been different that day, softer somehow, like he'd finally stopped playing a role he'd been performing for decades. "Nathan," he'd said, moving his knight in a pattern I didn't recognize. "What do you know about trust?" "It's earned, not given," I'd responded, the same answer he'd drilled into all of us since childhood. "No, boy. Real trust is knowing when to follow without understanding why. Your father knew that. He trusted me with something once, something precious, and I failed him. But you, Nathan, you're different. You don't want anything from me." "I never have, grandfather." "I know. That's why when the time comes, you'll trust me. Even when everyone else thinks you're a fool." Now, holding that ticket, his words felt less like a memory and more like a message. I picked up my phone and called my mother. "I'm going," I said as soon as she answered. "I knew you would," Grace replied without hesitation. "Your grandfather called me last month. He didn't say much, just that I should support whatever decision you made after the funeral." "Mom, this is crazy. I can't afford to miss work. I have responsibilities." "Nathan, your father once told me that Roland wasn't always the man we knew. He said there was a before and after in his father's life, and we only knew the after. Maybe this is about the before." I spent the next morning at Lincoln High, arranging for a substitute teacher. My principal, Dr. Washington, wasn't happy about the sudden request, but I'd never taken a sick day in 6 years, so she grudgingly approved 3 days off. 3 days to fly to Rome and figure out what game my grandfather was playing. "Mr. Whitmore, you okay?" asked Jasmine, one of my brightest students after my last class. "You seem different today." "Just thinking about history, Jasmine. How sometimes the most important moments look like nothing when they're happening." I packed light, one carry-on bag with 2 changes of clothes, and my father's old leather journal that I'd carried since his funeral. The Uber to Detroit Metropolitan Airport cost me $32 I couldn't spare, but I was already committed to this insanity. At the gate, waiting to board, I pulled out the envelope again. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. In the corner, barely visible, was a tiny number written in pencil. 1947. The year grandfather would have been 22. The year after he'd left the Navy. The flight attendant called my boarding group, and I got in line behind a family arguing about seating arrangements. The mother was trying to juggle 2 kids while the father checked his phone obsessively. Normal people with normal problems, not wondering why their dead grandfather had sent them on a mysterious journey across the Atlantic. I found my seat, 32B, middle seat in the back of the plane. Of course, Preston had been right about it being Coach. The man to my left was already asleep and snoring. The woman to my right had claimed both armrests and was watching a movie on her iPad without headphones. As the plane lifted off, Detroit shrinking below us, I thought about Preston, probably already in grandfather's office, sitting in his chair, feeling like a king. Mallory was definitely posting sunset photos from the yacht by now. Vernon and Beatrice were probably meeting with financial advisors about their newfound wealth. And here I was, cramped in coach, flying toward a mystery with money I didn't have to spare. But something felt right about it. For the first time since grandfather died, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The flight attendant came by with drinks. "Sir, something to drink?" "Just water, thanks." She handed me a bottle, and as I twisted it open, I remembered another chess lesson. Grandfather had sacrificed his queen, the most powerful piece, to win a game. I'd been shocked, unable to understand why he'd give up so much. "Power isn't about what you have, Nathan," he'd explained. "It's about what you're willing to lose to gain something better. Most people can't see past the loss, that's why they never really win." The plane banked east, heading into the night, toward Rome and whatever grandfather had hidden there. My cousins thought they'd won everything that mattered. But as I settled in for the 8-hour flight, I had a feeling that grandfather's real game was just beginning, and I was the only piece he'd positioned to play it. The captain announced our cruising altitude, and I closed my eyes, my father's journal pressed against my chest, trusting a dead man's plan even though I couldn't see the board. The wheels touched down at Rome's Fiumicino Airport at exactly 3:07 p.m. local time. My legs were cramped, my back ached, and I'd barely slept during the 8-hour flight. The Italian announcements mixed with English as we taxied to the gate, and suddenly the reality hit me. I was in Rome with no hotel reservation, no plan, and no idea what I was supposed to do next. Immigration was a blur of stamps and questions. "Purpose of visit?" the officer asked in accented English. "I honestly don't know," I replied, too tired to lie. He looked at me strangely but stamped my passport anyway. "Welcome to Italy." I followed the crowd toward baggage claim, even though I only had my carry-on. The arrivals hall was chaos. Families reuniting, drivers holding signs for business people, tourists looking lost. I was about to head for the exit when I saw it. A professionally printed sign reading, Nathan Whitmore, held by a man in an expensive black suit. My heart stopped. I approached cautiously. "I'm Nathan Whitmore." The driver's face lit up with relief. "Mr. Whitmore, finally. Please, come quickly." His English was heavily accented but clear. "Who sent you?" "Your grandfather arranged everything months ago. My name is Lorenzo. Please, we have a long drive." He took my bag before I could protest and led me outside to a black Mercedes sedan that probably cost more than I made in 2 years. The October air was warm, nothing like Detroit's autumn chill. Lorenzo opened the rear door for me, and I slid onto leather seats that felt like clouds. "Where are we going?" I asked as he pulled away from the curb. "Montefiore Estate, 1 hour north in the Sabin Hills." "I don't understand." My grandfather never mentioned any estate in Italy. Lorenzo met my eyes in the rearview mirror. "Mr. Rowland, he owned the estate for 45 years. He visit every September 1 week, always alone." 45 years. That would mean since 1980, when I was negative 12 years old. The math didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. We left Rome's sprawl behind, climbing into hills covered with olive groves and vineyards. The landscape was almost painfully beautiful, like something from a movie about finding yourself in Italy. Lorenzo drove with Italian confidence, taking curves at speeds that made me grip the door handle. "How did you know my grandfather?" I asked. "My father was his driver first. When Papa died, I take over. 20 years now I drive Mr. Rowland when he come. 20 years of September visits that none of us knew about." What else had grandfather hidden? The road became narrower, winding through a small village where old men sat outside a cafe watching us pass. Then Lorenzo turned onto a private road lined with cypress trees. At the end, electronic gates opened automatically, revealing a villa that took my breath away. 3 stories of honey-colored stone, terraces overlooking endless vineyards, gardens that looked like they belonged in a Renaissance painting. Lorenzo parked in front of massive wooden doors that had to be centuries old. Before I could process what I was seeing, the doors opened, and an elderly woman emerged. She was elegant in a way that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with grace. Her silver hair pulled back in a simple bun, her eyes the same steel gray as grandfather's. She walked toward me slowly, tears streaming down her face, and I knew before Lorenzo said the words that changed everything. "Nathan," Lorenzo said softly, "meet your grandmother, Sophia Whitmore." The world tilted. I actually reached for the car to steady myself. "That's impossible. My grandmother died before I was born." Sophia reached me then, her hands taking mine, her grip surprisingly strong. "Your American grandmother did die, Caro, but I am very much alive." Her accent was musical, her English perfect but formal. She studied my face like she was memorizing it. "You have his eyes," she whispered, "but your father's gentle spirit. Come inside, Nathan. There is so much to tell you." The villa's interior was understated elegance, nothing like the gaudy mansion Vernon and Beatrice owned. Sophia led me to a sitting room where the walls were covered with photographs. I saw my grandfather, young and laughing, standing in front of a small church. A wedding photo. Grandfather and Sophia, both barely in their 20s, radiantly happy. "We married in 1947, Sophia said, watching me process everything. Rowland had come to Italy with the Navy, stayed after the war to help with reconstruction. We met at a dance in Rome. He was so handsome, so full of dreams. We started with nothing, just a few acres of vines his friend sold us for almost nothing." She poured 2 glasses of wine from a crystal decanter. "This is from our vineyard. Heredità, we call it. Inheritance." The wine was extraordinary, complex and rich. "I don't understand. Grandfather had a whole life here." More than a life, Caro. He had a family, me, our son, Augusto, the grandchildren he never met because he chose America instead. He left you? The Korean War started. Roland felt duty calling. He was supposed to be gone 6 months. Her voice carried no bitterness, just sadness. But he met your American grandmother while on leave. She was pregnant with Vernon. An honorable man would have divorced me, but Roland couldn't bear to give up either life. So he kept both, separate, secret. My hands were shaking. He lived a complete lie. No, Nathan, he lived 2 truths. He loved us both in different ways. The vineyard grew, became successful. He sent money, visited every year, but he couldn't choose. Until now. She walked to an antique desk and pulled out a thick folder. Whitmore Vineyards International. $47 million in assets. It's all yours, Nathan. He was very specific. Not Vernon, not Preston, you. The documents Sophia handed me were overwhelming. Deeds, contracts, bank statements, all proving that my grandfather had built an entirely separate empire on this side of the Atlantic. But what hit me hardest was the video she played on an old laptop, recorded just 1 month before grandfather died. His face filled the screen, and for the first time ever he looked peaceful. Nathan, if you're watching this, then you trusted me enough to take the flight. Good. You always were the only one who understood that some things matter more than money. Your cousins got what they always wanted from me, the appearance of success. But appearances can be deceiving. Whitmore. Shipping has been hemorrhaging money for 3 years. I've hidden it in the books, but Preston's about to inherit a disaster. The penthouse has 3 mortgages. The yacht is leased. The Hampton estate. The bank owns 70% of it. I gave them exactly what they showed me they valued, hollow prizes that look golden from the outside. He leaned closer to the camera. But you, Nathan, you visited me every Sunday just to play chess. Never asked for anything. Never angled for position. You chose teaching over money because you wanted purpose. So I'm giving you what you never asked for. Truth, family, and yes, wealth that's actually real. The vineyard produces 2 million bottles a year. The villa has been in Sophia's family for 300 years. Your Uncle Augusto has been running operations, waiting to meet you. Your cousins Marco and Elena are good people, raised right. Nothing like Preston and Mallory. This is your real inheritance. A family that values work, land that produces something real, and a legacy built on truth, not lies. He paused, that familiar sharp look returning to his eyes. Oh, and Nathan, your next move is yours to make, but here's my advice. Preston's going to call within a month, begging for help. Be kinder to him than he was to you. That's what makes you better. Checkmate, my boy. The screen went dark. Sophia squeezed my shoulder gently. He talked about you constantly, she said. Every visit, stories about his grandson, the teacher who chose meaning over money. I spent 3 weeks in Italy, learning everything. Uncle Augusto looked so much like my father it made my chest tight. He ran the vineyard operations with quiet efficiency, never bitter about being the hidden son. Marco and Elena, my Italian cousins, welcomed me like a brother returning from war. They taught me about wine, about the land, about the grandfather they knew versus the one I knew. He was different here, Elena told me one evening as we walked through the vines. Lighter. He'd work in the fields, hands in the dirt, laughing. Not the businessman you knew. The call from Preston came exactly 23 days later. I was back in Detroit teaching my classes when my phone rang at midnight. Nathan, it's Preston. We need to talk. His voice had lost all its arrogance. The company's bankrupt. The accountants found everything. Dad's lost the house. Mallory's penthouse got foreclosed yesterday. It's all gone. I'm sorry, Preston. No, you're not, and you shouldn't be. We were horrible to you. He paused, and I heard him struggling. Grandfather left you something real, didn't he? Yes. Good. You deserve it. You were the only one who actually loved him instead of his money. I made Preston an offer the next day. Manage the U.S. distribution for Heredité wines. Salary, not ownership. He accepted immediately. Mallory took longer to swallow her pride, but eventually she came around too. She's actually good at marketing when she's selling something real instead of just herself. She's engaged to Lorenzo's son now, living in Rome, learning the business from the ground up. Vernon and Beatrice moved to a small apartment in New Jersey. Vernon found work as a bookkeeper. Beatrice got a job at Nordstrom. They don't speak to me, but Preston says they're actually happier, forced to rely on each other instead of money. My mother moved into the guest house on the California property I bought with my first distribution payment. She retired from nursing and spends her days painting, something she'd always wanted to do but never had time for. And me, I still teach, but only part-time now. Summers I spend in Italy, learning the wine business, getting to know the family I never knew existed. My students think it's hilarious that their history teacher owns a vineyard. I use it to teach them about international trade, agriculture, and family businesses. Last week, I was in the villa, playing chess with Uncle Augusto, when he said something that stopped me cold. You know, your grandfather always said the winner isn't who takes the most pieces, but who knows which pieces really matter. I looked at the board, then at the vineyards through the window, then at the photo of grandfather on the wall, young and hopeful in 1947. He won, I said. It just took 60 years for the game to end. Augusto smiled. No, Nathan, you won. You just didn't know you were playing. That crumpled envelope they all laughed at? It wasn't just a plane ticket. It was an invitation to discover who I really was, where I really came from, and what really mattered. My grandfather gave my cousins what they thought they wanted, and gave me what I didn't know I needed. The last bottle of wine grandfather personally produced sits in my apartment in Detroit, unopened. The label says Heredita 2024, and underneath, in his handwriting, for Nathan, who understood that the best inheritance isn't what you're given, but what you're trusted to continue. Every Sunday, I still play chess. Sometimes with Augusto in Italy, sometimes with my students in Detroit, sometimes alone, thinking about the old man who orchestrated the longest game I've ever seen. He taught me that real wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in truth, family, and the courage to trust when nothing makes sense. Turns out the board everyone else was watching, that was just the distraction. The real game was happening on a completely different board, in a different country, in a different language. And grandfather made sure I was the only one who got an invitation to play. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to remember that sometimes the smallest gifts carry the biggest surprises. Drop a comment below about a time when something seemingly insignificant changed your life. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about families, secrets, and the unexpected ways life reveals who we really are.